Okay. So, if you were all here hoping to talk about how to make sure leadership recognizes the value that you bring to the organization and that all of the work that you do gets recognized and seen and taken into account the moments that matter, then this is the masterclass for you. The reason I put this together was because I've heard a lot of women say, I don't like to brag about myself, and my work should speak for itself. And the cruel reality is that it doesn't. And a lot of times, especially the higher up you go in leadership, your boss or their boss's boss, they don't have time to really look at everything you're doing. And most of the time, when you're in leadership at director levels, your work is mostly avoiding the problems. So when you avoid the problems, when you do a lot of things that prevent something from happening, it doesn't happen. And so nobody notices what you do, right? And that's what we want to change. We don't want to just leave it to chance or just say good work speaks for itself. We need to make sure everybody is interpreting our value the right way. So let's just picture for a moment here. What is the ideal state? What if leadership had that full picture, right, of the impact you're creating, the judgment behind decisions? And this is a big one, right? Because all they see is project was done on time. Yay, move on to something else. They don't see the struggle. They don't see the decision making. They don't see the tough decisions you had to make and how you led the team to get where you are. The risks you managed because they never came to fruition, right? The problems you prevented and the value beyond that execution. All of those negotiations that you do every day, the communication with the client, the communication with stakeholders, all of that goes unseen a lot of times. And that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we're not bragging, but our value gets recognized. Because let's be honest here, right? This is not about the bragging because nobody likes it. I don't like it. I don't do it. And I mean, most great performers don't do that. They just want to do the work, they want to accomplish things, and they want to move on. They don't want to have to be louder. And my advice is never about performance. I don't want you to just pretend or just to be someone you're not. I want you to be very comfortable in what you're communicating. And what we need to do is just change a little bit of how that is being communicated, not just polish it, but add the value. So at senior levels, the performance, and we say this every time for every topic, the performance is not really the whole story because there's a lot of maneuvering you do. And as I said in the previous slide, you do a lot of negotiating, a lot of communicating, a lot of preventing issues. So the part that leadership misses is how you think, how you communicate, right? The things that you notice so you were able to prevent the problem or the risk, right? And what is that judgment that's allowing you to move a lot of pieces for them to all go to that project on time? Great, move on, right? But we want to make sure that that gets seen. So the capability really is never the problem, or in most cases, it's not the problem. The problem is how we translate what we did, and most importantly, how we communicate, how we report what happens. Because in regular situations, in a regular environment, being able to communicate your value is important. So you're not passed on promotions. So you can grow at the rate that your performance allows you to grow. But in this environment where it's just so crazy, anyways, the pharmaceutical industry is upside down some days, it's even more important when it comes to decisions to downsize, to promote, to move people around, and you want to make sure your value is 100% understood. So again, this is for you if you are doing the work, you're already a high performer. You know you do a lot, but the visibility may not be there, right? And you don't have time to go putting things in place for making sure that everybody sees what you do, right? You already have enough on your plate. So how do we do that? You support your team, stakeholders, clients. I mean, there's a full town that depends on your decisions, right? And it rarely gets seen or valued because you do it for the project and you push things forward. So you want your contributions to be valued and understood, right? Without having to brag, because we don't like doing it. And the most important part is the last one here. You sense that your impact may not be landing as clearly as it should, right? And we want to change that. So that's why you're here today. And this is not for you, and I don't think it's any of the case for you guys if you're not willing to do the work, right? If you're not willing to honestly look at how you're communicating, you're willing to honestly look at what you need to do different and practice it, because that's the most important part. So you are in the right place because it's not like you're trying to prove your worth. All you're trying to do is for what you already do to be visible. Yeah. So we don't want to add to your plate. You have enough, but we want to make sure that everything that you do is recognized, or anything that you do that actually matters is recognized, right? So, and why do I care about this? I was in this leadership, and I think I mentioned this one of my last masterclass as well, but I was in this senior leadership, very exclusive training for the company, for future women leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And I did a 360 assessment, and one of the main points was work on your executive presence. I had no idea what it was. My boss had no idea what it was. The sponsor, VP that was supposed to help me didn't know what it was. The worst part is the coach that I was assigned didn't really help me understand it either. And so that executive presence is demonstrating, being able to demonstrate what you do and translate the value of what you do so people see the value that you bring to the organization. But we need to learn how to communicate that. A little bit about me. Most of you know me already, but I'm Vanessa. Nice to meet you. And I've been in corporate, or I was in corporate for over 25 years, and more than 20 of those in leadership. And I've seen it. I've seen it on myself where I was doing the work and it didn't get recognized or seen. It's not that anybody didn't want to see it. They just didn't. They were busy, and I wasn't able to translate what I really wanted to do or how I was taking care of all of those issues. And I've seen other women being passed on for promotion or very, very frustrated because somebody else with less experience in not as great performance got ahead of them. The industry is full of them. So I want to make sure that you're translating all of that and that you're able to have leadership recognize what you do. And what this is really about is what I do is help women in a coaching session. And we go through what is the issue, what do you want to solve in different situations. And again, in particular with this one, it's also on trying to translate things you don't see. Because a lot of times we don't see the things that we are doing to not push our value forward. So as we go through today's examples, I want you to think about how this applies to what you're doing today and how changing the way you communicate could potentially have leadership have much better understanding of your value. And if you want to have a complimentary, no strings attached, like people would say, session with me to look at your particular situation. That's the QR code. You can take a little, grab your phone, and we'll have it at the end as well. And we can get on a call and talk about your particular situation. I'm going to be talking about a lot of examples from my clients, but it's always good to be able to translate that to what's happening for you. So I'm going to go through 3 shifts today, which I know will make a big difference in how leadership perceives your value. The first one is recognize the interpretation gap. What that means is the gap between what you do and what leadership sees. There's a gap in there because you're potentially not communicating all those things that you do for that outcome. Translating all that activity. So once we recognize what it is, we need to translate it to be able to verbalize it in a way that's going to be understood and carried forward. And we need to put things in place so we understand how leadership is perceiving us. So we are able to change the narrative if we need to, or continue building on what leadership already knows about us. And this is just a little disclaimer. I usually like talking about real life examples in my webinars because it brings a lot more reality to what's happening, right? And you can see it and almost have it tangible for you. Although I'm sure you will all appreciate that everybody wants to keep their own experiences private. So all of the names are stage names, but the stories are real from my coaching sessions with my clients. So you'll see different names. They are stage names. I don't like calling them fake names. So they're stage names. And that's what I do so I can respect the privacy of my clients. So with the most important thing that I want to share today, and the one thing I want you to come out with, is most women I speak with are not underperforming, but leadership is not understanding the value that they bring to the table to be able to advocate for you when they are on other tables where discussions happen in terms of promotions and who's the next leadership, who can be put in different opportunities. And this is this is a recent case of a client that I spoke with recently, and Beth could have listed 100 things. She had been hired by a smaller CRO after working in big CROs. She was hired by a smaller CRO to help them set things up because they weren't very clearly set in place, and they needed somebody to come in and help them understand how the work was being done and how to push it forward. And 6 months later, I mean, there was a lot of internal politics, if you will, and people trying to lobby for Beth's position, who they saw as an outsider. And so 6 months after she had been working there, she got called into a meeting with HR and her boss. Those are never good. And as they were going through the conversation for eliminating Beth's role, this higher leader in the company said, "So what kind of impact have you made?" I mean, that was almost salt to injury. And at that moment, I mean, you can imagine the situation, but at that moment, Beth could have thought of 100 things, a million things probably. It's a much more accurate number of things she had done. But it also dawned on her that, true to herself, she had put her head down and done the work. She had put processes in place. She had made sure that teams were performing as a team, that people were collaborating, that everybody was understanding what the other group was doing. There was so much work that she got done in 6 months. And that other person came and said, what kind of impact have you made? And so I'm working with Beth clearly on how to communicate her impact so the same thing doesn't happen again. But this is very common and it's very real. So again, the problem was not the lack of impact because she had changed processes, dynamics, a lot of things. She had prevented failures. She saw it coming. She put the fire down before it started. And nobody saw that. Yeah, nobody saw the problem she had solved. Nobody saw all those little decisions that made her day to day go smoother or the project go in the right direction, all that judgment. So the impact was there, but the interpretation was not. That leader that was responsible for firing her that day did not have an understanding of her impact. And that's just so frustrating. So that's the interpretation gap. So you need to ask yourself these questions. And there's two things, right? There's what we can affect and what we can change, and the things that no matter what we do, we can't. But what's in our responsibility for ourselves really is to do everything in our power to change that. And I'll go through a lot of what you just talked in the presentation, and then we can come back to it at the end if I didn't hit any of your points. And again, we can always schedule a call and follow up as well later if there's something else you wanted to chat about and I don't cover. But yeah, thank you for your comment. So what is the interpretation gap, right? You go and prevent a huge serious situation. What does leadership see? Nothing happened, business as usual. You managed a significant risk that took a lot of moving parts, that you had to lobby for things and talk to different leaders and do different things, smooth delivery, no visible change. How many times has that happened? And it's annoying, right? And you had a huge issue within the team and you stabilized the team through that change. The team seems fine. No credit, signed. So those are the things that happen day to day and what is not seen by leadership. And that's what we want to change here. So when value is not translated, it gets misread, right? Again, just to harp on it one more time, execution, helpfulness, reliability, activity, it all goes together. And if you do not help leadership understand what your work means, they will interpret whatever through their lens. And the reality is that I get it, some leaders don't want to see what you do, but a lot of times they're just so busy. Unless it's hitting them, they won't see it. So our responsibility is to make sure that what we're doing and our value hits them. So where do we start? Not adding more to your plate because you have no more time in your day. Not polishing the surface either. We start by understanding what is leadership interpreting when they look at your work. So how do we recognize that interpretation gap? What are the signals? Because if you're not shaping what your value is and you're not communicating in a way that's hitting them, then they're going to interpret whatever they can. And all of your projects may be on time, successful, on budget. But if they don't see what you went through to put that in place and make it happen, you go under the radar, right? Because what happens? The biggest issues are what hits leadership. And guess what? That person that didn't prevent the issue and then had to deal with it, and somehow they were able to still get the project done, they're going to get more credit than you are when you actually prevented it and didn't even have to spend the resources to fix something, right? So that's what we want to see. So think about these 4 big buckets when you're thinking about how you're going to communicate your value. Think about what is the complexity that you're dealing with, right? What are all the layers that you deal with that sometimes you don't even think about them because you just do it? What are the risks that you're managing, mitigating, and preventing? What is the influence? So who are you dealing with day in and day out to make sure that project goes forward? And why does this matter? A lot of times we miss that piece. And for this to be able to work, and going back to Vaishali's also comment, a great thing to do, and this is something that I'm also working with one of my clients, is making sure you know what is it? What's your leader's objective? And what's their boss's objective? And then translate what you're doing on how it's helping that objective. That's when you get their attention. So before an update, and you can screenshot this screen, this is very helpful. Before you go in for an update, ask yourself, what might they be missing, right? So what changed because of my leadership? What decisions did I make that created that momentum? What does this work mean for the business, the team, the client, the strategy? That's a very important one because you're tying what you're doing to what's important. What's the problem that you prevented? What's the risk that you managed? And put all that together and answer the last one. What do I need leadership to understand? So that's recognizing the gap. That's the first step. We don't go into the how yet, but the first thing is recognizing and trying to put together what is it that you're doing that you want leadership to have visibility into. So you don't want to be bragging. You want to create context, right? So you don't want to say, oh, I'm so great. I did all this, but you want to communicate. Here's what changed. This is why it matters and what it means to the business. If you can tie it to that, you have their attention. So now that we recognize the gap, we need to figure out how are we going to translate it, right? Because you can sit there and be like, okay, Vanessa, I get it. You got it. That's exactly what I need to do. How do I do that? We need to stop reporting activity and we need to start communicating impact. So the activity language is I met with the team. Some leadership value language, we're not even at the full sentence you need to get to yet, but is I aligned the team around the decision point. And again, put in the details, right? I aligned all these people, all these teams, all these leaders, whatever it is, around this decision, right? Or instead of just I handled the escalation, I contained the escalation and identified this is the recurrent risk. Now, the next step we'll see in a few slides more is going to be what's the next step, right? So this is what we need to do moving forward. So this is a little quick example of how to go from activity language we need to stop doing into leadership value, right? Not just communicate the activity, communicate the value of how we handle that. So we need to look at this framework, which is the result, meaning next move. Next time that you go to a status reporting meeting or something like that, start with the result. A lot of times, and this is executive presence or authority, building authority 101, however you want to call it. If you start with all the ancillary information, by the time you get to the result, you lost the audience. Or they have a million thoughts of what you said, and you're never able to get to that result. So start with the result. Then go to the meaning of why it matters, connected to the risk, the business priorities, and team decisions, etc. And communicate next move. Again, if we bring it back, Jen, I know you were on my last one. If we bring it back to the last masterclass, it's the whole communicating, right? And being able to continue where we're going and being that leader that's viewed as shaping direction. So you want to get the result, meaning next move. So again, in blue in this box is instead of I handle the client escalation, which is typically what we do because we think leadership has no time for all of the details. It doesn't take too much longer to say the escalation is contained. The larger issue is a recurrent expectation gap, and I'm recommending we reset ownership before this becomes a delivery risk. Again, this sounds a little bit high level because I don't have details here, but that's how you need to translate it, and that's how leadership can understand the depth of what you go through with that. We also have Ari, right, another one of my clients, who had to decide what leadership actually needed to know. Leadership never has time to listen to you ramble. They shouldn't have to either. She had to present to the CEO. And there were a lot of moving pieces, multiple stakeholders, things in motion. And her challenge was that she had too much information to share. So how do we boil it down to something that communicates impact, but we don't lose people in the details? So you go through these questions again, right? What did legal need to know? What did QA need to know? What needed escalation? What was the actual issue? What was noise? We always want to keep noise out of the communication. If there's a lot of things that need to happen, but it doesn't really make it to you needing to communicate any value there, just leave it out, right? And what decision is needed? You always want to communicate to CEOs and higher up leaders the issue, what it means to the business, what your recommendation is. Add on to that, what decision do you need, right? Because that's why you are presenting. So the more senior the room, the more they need your judgment, right? Sometimes we fall into, oh, I need to make sure they know what's happening. Actually, what they need is not to know what's happening. They need to know you're handling it. And the way we communicate that is not being busy in communication and communicating activity, but for them to know that no matter what, they know your judgment, your intervention will take things the right way, right? So we don't need to give them the detail and the background context. We don't need to give them a full account of what you did or a status report, right? What they need is what matters, what does not matter, why it matters to the business, tie it to the business objectives, what happens next, what do you recommend, and what's the decision needed. So we don't want to wait until everybody has an idea of your value. We want to create those loops for you to know in real time. So I had another client that she was devastated when she came to me because she had always gotten very positive feedback. And then one day, all out of the blue, her manager was talking to her and disclosed an issue that had come up with her and the way she led the team. It was a pretty significant issue that had gone all the way to HR. And so the problem is that she could not figure out where that was coming from, why it was coming up now, who had said what. And then by the time you get that feedback, since usually they want to keep the parties protected, they don't give you that much information either. So you never want to be caught in that. You need to make sure you're always asking for that feedback, because without that context, everybody made up their own idea about what was happening, and you're left with having no clue of what's happening. So positive feedback. We get into our meeting with our boss maybe once or twice a year. If you're lucky, they do that. And The feedback you receive is people like working with you, your work is appreciated, things are generally fine, no one's raising concerns directly. There's nothing there. Really, we love positive feedback. It makes us feel good, but it gives you nothing to work with moving forward, right? So unless you ask the right questions, you're not going to get the right answers. What you really need is accurate visibility. How is your impact on your judgment and how it's being perceived? Your growth goals and readiness, influence across the organization, and how you want to be positioned. Now, let me be very clear. You may want all these things, but you have to work at it. And it's not something that you can go and tell your boss, I need you to do all these things for me so leadership recognized me. And you don't want to either blame your boss because the rest of leadership doesn't see your value. You get to a certain point in your career where you are the owner of your visibility, your value communicating. You are the one that needs to branch out. And that's something else I'm doing with one of my clients, which is pretty critical for her own career objectives. So next time that you meet with your boss and you need concrete feedback, don't just ask, what are people saying? I mean, how am I doing? Ask, what impact are you seeing? So your boss, what impact your boss is seeing from my work, and what should I continue building on? You want them to be specific. Where do you think my contribution is most visible right now? And this one's an important one because if it's not the same that you think it's critical, or the way that you want your contributions to be viewed, then there's a gap we need to fill in there as well. And again, this is a page that maybe you want to screenshot and have it with you, right? And again, I don't like scripts, so put your own words in there. It's to give you an idea of the kind of questions you really need to be asking. Where might my impact not be coming through clearly enough? If you have a good relationship with your boss and they know what you're trying to accomplish, rarely ever they will come and say, yeah, because so-and-so or the VP or the CEO, they're not understanding this part of your, if you don't ask, they're not going to tell you, right? What would you need to see from me to trust me with more strategic responsibility? This is a big one because a lot of times we want more responsibility and we go and ask our boss, what else could I be doing? I want to learn more. But this is a way to open it up and put the responsibility on your mentor, boss, etc., to give you that information. Is there any part of my leadership you think is being misunderstood? You get great constructive feedback on this one, even if you don't like it, but it's very, very useful. And what should I be communicating clearly upward? So the three prongs of this whole approach is, again, recognize where the gap is, learn to communicate it differently. Remember, instead of I dealt with the escalation, actually mention what the problem was, what you found out, and what you propose moving forward. Add to that any decision making if you need it. And then create those communication loops so you actually know how people are perceiving you, and you know then what gap you need to fill. Because when you communicate your value clearly, it's a lot easier for leadership to see your value. They don't have time, as I said before, to go digging into your value. When you're at director level, really is director, executive director, senior director, whatever, it's really hard for whomever's your boss that has a million other things going on to go digging for that value. You need to put it in front of them, and you need to make sure that they trust your judgment. That's why you're there. You're not there to communicate all the problems and get a solution from them. You're there to communicate the problems, what you propose the solution is, and what the next step should be. That's what you're there for. That's why you're a leader, a senior leader at that. You need to advocate for you again. And really, what that does is include you earlier in communication, and also your leaders will be able to advocate for you as well, because we all know how it goes, right? When they make these decisions, there's going to be different leaders from different functions potentially meeting and deciding who's the next person that's going to take this opportunity or that opportunity. It's not in a vacuum. It gets presented to someone. You want that someone to already know about you and your boss to be able to advocate for you. But if you don't advocate for yourself first, it's not going to happen. So this is really the kind of work that I do inside one-on-one coaching, right? So as I said before, it's the real moments. And again, you can always do this by yourself as well, although it's a little bit harder, but you need to take those real moments. You need to try to figure out what's happening. The value of having a coach is that they'll tell you what you're missing. It's a lot easier for me to see the hidden patterns or those things when you are in the hole. It's harder to see you're in a hole. It's just black. So having somebody else to help you identify how to move forward helps in this conversation. And really, it's an iteration, right? I don't have the solution. We come up with ideas. You implement week to week, and we see where it takes us. And if something doesn't work, we come up with something else. There's always something else to try. And Chris is again, this is from just a couple of weeks ago. And I love working with this guy because she's so committed. She came to me because she knows she's a very high performer, but she was in a couple of meetings where she said something, the meeting moved on, somebody else said the same thing, and now everybody recognized it from that person, let alone it was a guy. So it's just, again, salt to injury. But when we looked at it, it wasn't just an easy stereotype of, well, if a guy says it. She was not clear on her message, right? It got diluted in the way that she went about it. And so we're working on that with her, on her communication style, on how she is actually working with leadership to make sure her value is not just understood by her boss, but by other leaders that depend on her team's work to continue forward. And that's how clinical research is. All departments are interconnected, right? So the way that she's doing it is really leading with the outcome. She's seen a big difference where now in meetings, she leads with the outcome, names what matters most. She pauses so people have time to digest what she's saying, and really she's connecting it to the relevance for the business. And I think that is one of the biggest wins she's had so far, because she's explaining why the work matters, right? So again, what changed? She's leading with the outcome. She connects to what matters, the pause, the value in one clear sentence. And she's always thinking about who needs to hear the value. So she's able to make those intentional connections. And the best part, and I love this, recently she got feedback as a presenter. She wanted to work on her presentation skills and how she communicates. She always got the feedback of, oh, the presentation was great. Thank you for the training. She did this other presentation recently, and the feedback she got is, you are a great presenter. You made the point so clearly. I understand what we needed to take from this. That was huge. And then the next day, to make it even better, I mean, she was over the moon when we talked last week. A team member came to her and said, it is so refreshing to be working with a leader that has a vision. So almost like a side effect, since we're in the pharmaceutical industry, of her putting all of this together so leadership sees her value, her team is seeing it as well. That is so powerful. So what now? Again, be intentional. Whatever you do, either you work with me or not, the main message here is be intentional. Communicate intentionally, right? Take those questions and apply them. Try to really think about what is meaningful here, how it ties to the business objectives, and how am I impacting the outcome. It's really not about proving yourself, because you do that every day, right? You demonstrate that you can do it, and your performance speaks for itself to you, but it's also about making the truth of your leadership easier to see, because as we know, leaders are always super busy. And this is a little bit, I mean, a duh, but you can just hope people see your value, or you can be intentional. And again, you can do this by yourself if you want to. It just becomes a little harder, and it takes a little longer. So if you want to apply your own situation, in coaching, we look at the really real leadership moments, those high stake communications, stakeholder dynamics. I mean, I've gone through mind mapping for who needs to know what. It's not just your boss. Think about this as interactions with any leaders in the organization that in the future may have a say, because maybe you are working with a leader that doesn't recognize your value. To Vaishali's point, they don't want to recognize your value. They have a hidden agenda. But if other leaders understand your value, it's, again, easier for you to get to where you want to be. You need to be communicating the impact and the judgment from your day-to-day interactions. So again, the next step, and as we're wrapping up, and I will open it up for questions. I did better this time. At least we have 10 minutes for questions. Hopefully you realize today that you need to translate what you're doing. And it's not that you need to do more. You just need to look at what you're doing, carve out what is the impact to the business, what do they need to know, and how you communicate that judgment that you went through for that outcome. So when the study goes well, when the project goes well, it's not it went well, nobody even knows your name. It went well because I understand this leader's ability to make it that way. That's what you want. And again, if you want to just chat through and have a strategy session, it's free, complimentary. We can talk about what you're going through, see if coaching would even be helpful for you or not. Definitely, you'll come out with some ideas out of that. Get that QR code. And I have a gift for anyone that actually schedules the call, because this helps going through the call, which is the impact communication prompts. And again, it's prompts in line with those couple slides where I said, take a screenshot of this, where it helps you organize your thoughts so you know how to communicate your impact better. So again, your impact is most likely already there. You just need to translate it and help people see it. So having come to this point, do you guys have any questions, comments, anything you were hoping to hear today that I didn't go through?